Delilah Whitmore, Marcus Whitmore, and Caleb Whitmore, three cousins bound by blood, trust, and a deadly secret. In the heart of a quiet town, beneath the polished image of family success, one of them was planning a betrayal so chilling it would leave one dead, another broken, and the last vanishing into darkness. What began as a twisted love triangle soon spiraled into a calculated crime of manipulation, obsession, and escape. This is the story of how Delilah Whitmore became the most dangerous daughter Mill Creek had ever known. The town of Mill Creek had always been a place where nothing truly terrible happened. The worst crimes in recent memory were disputes over property lines or the occasional petty theft. That's why the Whitmore family stood out so sharply. They weren't just well off. They were nearly royalty in the community. Their vineyard business had been passed down through generations, and with it came wealth, prestige, and a sense of authority that no one dared to challenge. Their estate sat on the edge of town like a castle, surrounded by perfectly trimmed hedges and rows of grapevines that seemed to stretch forever. Inside that grand estate lived Delilah Whitmore, the only daughter of Charles and Margaret Whitmore. Delilah had always been the crown jewel of the family. She had the kind of beauty that made people stop mid-sentence. Striking blue eyes, long dark hair, and an elegant presence that made her seem older than her years. She was a star student in school, a local pageant winner, and the kind of young woman who could charm both the mayor and the mechanic. People called her perfect, and to many she was. Her social media was filled with smiles, charity work, and family gatherings. The curated life of someone destined for greatness. But Delilah wasn't who she pretended to be. Behind closed doors, she moved differently. She was sharp, observant, and calculating. Her charm wasn't warmth, it was strategy. Her smiles were weapons. Even as a child, she had a way of twisting situations to her benefit without anyone noticing. Teachers adored her, classmates envied her, and her parents praised her. All while she slowly learned how to control them. She knew how to give just enough to make people feel close to her, but never enough to be truly known. By the time she turned 21, Delilah had developed a taste for secrets. She began pulling away from her parents under the guise of independence. They attributed her distance to maturity. She told them she was focused on school, on internships, on building her future. They were proud. But in reality, Delilah was building something else entirely. A double life full of deception, power, and forbidden relationships. She spent more time at the vineyard under the pretense of learning the business. That's when she reconnected with her cousins, Marcus and Caleb. The three of them had grown up together, thick as thieves in childhood. Over the years, their paths had diverged. Marcus had become quiet and introspective, taking on a creative role in the business, designing labels and marketing campaigns. Caleb, meanwhile, had bounced from job to job before settling into vineyard logistics, where his charm and confidence proved valuable. At first, the visits seemed innocent. Delilah would bring them coffee, ask about their work, laugh at their jokes. It was natural, even sweet. But something shifted. She began spending more time alone with each of them, planting seeds of emotional dependence. To Marcus, she showed vulnerability. She talked about feeling misunderstood, about the pressure of perfection, about her longing to escape the expectations placed on her. Marcus listened, captivated, convinced he saw the real Delilah, the one hidden from the world. With Caleb, it was different. She challenged him, teased him, pulled him into her world of risk. They would take late-night drives, drink wine from the family cellar, and talk about escaping the vineyard to start a life in a city where no one knew their last names. Caleb believed her. He thought they were in love. Neither cousin had any idea that Delilah was seeing them both. She balanced the lies carefully, maintaining control with a precision that bordered on genius. She scheduled their time like appointments, manipulated conversations to ensure one never suspected the other. If either man grew too inquisitive, she would fake an emotional breakdown, accusing them of not trusting her. It worked every time. What no one saw was how much Delilah enjoyed the game. It wasn't about love, it was about control, about the feeling of power that came from bending others to her will. She saw the emotional investment her cousins gave her, not as affection, but as fuel. She didn't want to be adored. She wanted to be obeyed. Still, Delilah was careful. She understood that the wrong move could unravel everything. But the danger only thrilled her more. She didn't care who might get hurt. She believed she was untouchable, the master of her own story. In her mind, she wasn't playing with fire. She was fire. And yet even fire eventually consumes what surrounds it. Marcus and Caleb Whitmore had always lived in the long shadow of the Whitmore name. Though they were cousins to Delilah, their connection to the family fortune was distant. Their fathers, Charles's younger brothers, had never achieved the same success or influence. Still, the vineyard offered them both a stable place to work, and the estate became as familiar to them as their own homes. From a young age, they had looked up to Delilah. She was the bright, golden child of the family, and they were often told to protect her, to treat her like royalty. That early reverence never fully left them, even as they all grew into adults. Marcus was the quieter of the two. He was a talented graphic designer who had carved out a niche for himself designing wine labels, packaging, and promotional material for the vineyard. He was thoughtful, artistic, and deeply introspective. His life was simple and predictable. He spent his evenings reading, sketching, and dreaming of leaving Mill Creek behind for a life filled with culture and creativity. But something always held him back. His loyalty to the family, his uncertainty about his worth, and the unspoken belief that he could never truly escape the expectations placed on him. Caleb, on the other hand, was restless and charismatic. He had a natural ease with people, the kind of confidence that made others follow his lead. Unlike Marcus, he didn't fear risk. His path to the family business had been less direct. He tried a dozen jobs before returning to the vineyard out of necessity more than passion. But he brought energy to the operation, streamlining deliveries, managing staff, and handling the more chaotic side of production. People liked working with Caleb, even if they didn't always trust his impulsive streak. Delilah re-entered their lives gradually, though with undeniable intent. She had always been part of family events, of course, holidays, reunions, fundraisers, but now she was showing up during the workday, asking questions about vineyard operations, sitting in on meetings, expressing interest in the business side of things. At first, both cousins were happy to see more of her. She brought energy and curiosity into their routines, and her presence seemed genuine. Marcus noticed how she lingered near his workspace, admiring his sketches and asking about his artistic inspirations. She told him she wished she had the courage to be creative, to live a life driven by passion instead of obligation. It touched Marcus deeply. He believed he was seeing the hidden, tender version of Delilah, the version that felt trapped under the weight of her family's legacy. When she started opening up about her fears, her loneliness, and her dissatisfaction with the world's expectations, Marcus felt special. He thought he was helping her find herself. Meanwhile, with Caleb, Delilah took a more daring approach. She challenged him, questioned his choices, and dared him to think beyond Mill Creek. She flirted openly, testing boundaries, and he responded with enthusiasm. She told him that he was different, that he had the potential to break free from the small-town trap. Their conversations were electric, filled with shared secrets, late-night confessions, and the kind of laughter that draws people too close. Caleb was soon wrapped up in the fantasy she painted, of the two of them running away together, building something new, leaving the vineyard and their pasts behind. Neither man suspected the other. Delilah was careful, strategic, and cruelly precise. She crafted two entirely different identities, showing Marcus one side of her and Caleb another. Each believed they were the only one she truly trusted. Each believed they were in love with the real Delilah, and each became more entangled emotionally and mentally in her web. Delilah thrived in the duality. She wasn't burdened by guilt or fear of discovery. If anything, the secrecy excited her. The more risk she took, the more powerful she felt. She wasn't lying to protect anyone. She was lying to dominate, to see how far she could push the limits without anyone catching on. The affection and loyalty from both men weren't prizes to her. They were tools. She used their feelings like currency, investing just enough to keep them hooked while staying one step ahead of suspicion. Family gatherings became tense without anyone knowing why. Marcus grew more withdrawn. Caleb became more possessive. Delilah expertly played peacemaker when needed, diffusing tension with smiles and empty reassurances. No one realized that she was the source of the growing divide between the cousins. She watched it all unfold like a director behind the scenes, satisfied with the way her carefully crafted drama was taking shape. But every game has a breaking point, and Delilah was inching closer to hers with every calculated lie. The stakes were getting higher. The cousins were beginning to change, shaped by their love for her and their unspoken rivalry. Delilah believed she was in control. What she didn't realize was that emotions, once ignited, don't follow plans. And soon her perfect deception would lead to consequences no one could have predicted. The night of October 17th started like any other in Mill Creek. Calm, quiet, and cloaked in the thick silence of autumn. Rain tapped steadily against the windows of the Whitmore estate as clouds moved in over the hills, blanketing the vineyard in darkness. The workers had long since gone home, and only a few lights flickered in the mansion. The storm had driven most people indoors, unaware that something far more sinister than bad weather was unfolding beneath their feet. Earlier that day, Delilah had asked Caleb and Marcus to meet her separately in the wine cellar. She told Caleb she wanted to show him a rare vintage she'd discovered, something they could share to celebrate their future. She told Marcus she had a surprise for him, something that would prove how serious she was about leaving Mill Creek with him. Neither man questioned her request. They trusted her completely. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. The Whitmore wine cellar was an old stone-walled chamber beneath the estate, cool and silent, lined with aging barrels and dusty bottles. It was a place of history and luxury. And on this night, it became a crime scene. Around 10:30 p.m., a groundskeeper walking past the rear entrance noticed the cellar door ajar and a faint light inside. He went to investigate, assuming someone had forgotten to lock up. What he found was a nightmare. Caleb was slumped against a wall, unconscious and barely breathing, his wrists bound with thick rope, his face bruised and bloodied. Just feet away lay Marcus, face down on the stone floor, unmoving. A shattered wine bottle lay beside him, soaked in blood. Emergency services were called immediately. Caleb was rushed to the hospital. Marcus was pronounced dead at the scene. Detectives arrived shortly after and sealed off the estate. The cellar was scoured for evidence. There were no signs of forced entry. No valuables had been taken. But they did find something troubling. Faint traces of a third person's blood on the broken wine bottle. It wasn't Caleb's or Marcus's. Preliminary testing matched it to someone in the Whitmore family. That someone was Delilah. But Delilah was gone. Her phone was off. Her room appeared untouched, but closer inspection revealed several missing items: a suitcase, cash, and important personal documents. Surveillance footage showed her leaving the property around 8 p.m., just before the storm rolled in. She was alone and calm, carrying a small duffel bag. No one had seen her since. Initially, suspicion fell on Caleb. He had survived. Marcus hadn't. It seemed plausible that a heated argument had turned violent. Maybe jealousy had erupted into rage. But Caleb, once conscious, gave a different story. He claimed he had no memory of the attack. He remembered walking into the cellar, seeing Delilah waiting for him, and then nothing. The next thing he knew, he was waking up in pain, unable to move. Police were skeptical. Amnesia, after all, was a convenient excuse. But the forensic evidence didn't support a fight between the cousins. Caleb's injuries suggested he'd been hit from behind, and there were no defensive wounds on Marcus's body. He hadn't seen it coming. What disturbed investigators most, though, was the careful placement of everything. The scene didn't feel chaotic. It felt staged. The media quickly seized on the story. The Whitmores, once admired, were now the center of a dark mystery. The local paper ran headlines about betrayal, family secrets, and murder beneath the vines. The community was in disbelief. The perfect daughter, the charming cousins, the beloved estate, all tainted by blood. As the search for Delilah intensified, more questions emerged. Why had she asked both cousins to meet her? How had she overpowered two grown men? Was someone helping her? And most chilling of all, had she planned this from the beginning? Days passed with no sign of her. A full-scale manhunt was launched. Detectives searched nearby woods, combed through financial records, and questioned everyone who'd had contact with her in the weeks prior. They found nothing. It was as if Delilah had vanished into thin air. Inside the estate, the atmosphere shifted. Margaret and Charles Whitmore went into seclusion, refusing to speak to the media. Caleb remained under medical observation, guarded by police. The staff moved quietly, whispering to each other in the halls, haunted by the thought that someone they knew, someone they admired, might have orchestrated a murder. What had once been the pride of Mill Creek had become a house of silence and suspicion. The rain eventually stopped, but the storm Delilah left behind was just beginning. 3 days after the horrific scene in the wine cellar, a breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A local fisherman reported seeing an abandoned car near the edge of Lake Grafton, roughly 15 miles from the Whitmore estate. It was partially hidden by tall grass and trees, the driver's door still ajar. Police responded quickly and confirmed that it was Delilah Whitmore's vehicle. Inside the car, they found a nearly empty gas tank, a half-eaten sandwich, and a single muddy footprint on the back seat. The passenger compartment was clean, but the trunk told a different story. Tucked into one corner was a tightly sealed duffel bag filled with women's clothes, a prepaid cell phone, several bundles of cash, and, most disturbing, a set of printed fake IDs bearing Delilah's face and various aliases. One name stood out: Clara Dawson. Authorities spread out around the lake, scouring the surrounding forest and waterfront properties. That's when they found the lake house. The Whitmore family had owned it for decades but hadn't used it in years. It was a 2-story wooden cabin hidden among the trees, facing the water with a private dock. From the outside, it looked abandoned. But when investigators entered, it became clear someone had been living there recently. Inside, the house was cold and musty, but orderly. In the main room, a mattress lay on the floor along with empty food wrappers, a battery-powered lantern, and a notebook, thick and worn from use. The notebook contained pages of Delilah's handwriting, but they were more than just diary entries. They were records, plans, calculations. Each page was a deep dive into her private world. She had written about her relationships with Marcus and Caleb in unsettling detail, charting their behavior, their routines, their weaknesses. There were maps, sketches, and timelines. Delilah had studied them as if preparing for an experiment, not engaging in love. She analyzed their emotional responses to her actions, noting how long it took them to respond to a text, what gifts they appreciated most, how jealousy manifested differently in each of them. She called it the game. In one entry, Dated 2 weeks before the murder, she wrote, "They would destroy each other if I let them. But why let chaos bloom when I can plant the seed myself?" Another entry, even more disturbing, read, "One will die, the other will grieve. I will vanish, the world will forget." Detectives realized they weren't dealing with a crime of passion. This was premeditated. Delilah hadn't snapped. She had planned every step. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was in the boathouse near the edge of the lake. Covered by a tarp and weighed down with rocks, police found a mannequin dressed in Delilah's clothes. It had been tied with rope and had fake blood smeared around the torso. It was positioned to sink and decay, simulating a drowned body. She hadn't just planned to disappear, she had intended to fake her own death. The realization turned the investigation upside down. What was initially thought to be a tragic family dispute was now an elaborate escape plot. Delilah had manipulated two men who loved her, turned them against each other, orchestrated a murder, and then vanished in a way designed to mislead everyone. The media frenzy intensified. National news picked up the story. The monster daughter, as some headlines called her, was now the subject of a multi-state manhunt. Psychological experts were brought in to examine her journals. They concluded that Delilah likely displayed traits consistent with narcissistic personality disorder and sociopathy. She viewed people as tools, relationships as opportunities for control, and emotions as weaknesses to exploit. Her parents were stunned. Margaret and Charles gave a brief, tearful statement to the press, expressing disbelief and begging Delilah to come home. But even they had begun to accept the truth. The daughter they raised had become someone they didn't recognize. Police issued warrants under all the names found in the duffel bag. Her bank accounts were frozen, her passport flagged, and every mode of transportation was monitored. Still, no one could find her. Delilah had vanished without a trace. Every step she had taken had been calculated. She had left no digital trail, no credit card charges, no phone signals. It was as if she had studied how to disappear and executed it flawlessly. What no one knew was that while Mill Creek was still in shock, and while law enforcement struggled to catch up, Delilah had already started a new life. Far away, under a false identity, she was blending into a new environment, watching the news reports with cold, detached satisfaction. In her eyes, she had won. It was almost a year to the day after Marcus Whitmore's murder, when a quiet tip came in from a small neighborhood in Montreal, Canada. A woman calling herself Clara Dawson had been arrested after a minor car accident. When police ran her ID, something didn't sit right. The license was expertly crafted but not perfect. The photo matched, the information checked out, on the surface. But her fingerprints, taken as part of standard procedure, told a different story. They didn't belong to Clara Dawson. They belonged to Delilah Whitmore. Within hours, news broke across international headlines. The monster daughter had been found. She hadn't just disappeared, she had reinvented herself completely. She had dyed her hair, changed her accent, and had even altered her mannerisms. In Montreal, she had been working as a live-in caregiver for an elderly couple, keeping a low profile, rarely going out, and making just enough money to survive. She had created a life where no one asked questions. No one recognized her face. When authorities arrived to extradite her to the United States, Delilah showed no signs of distress. She was calm, even amused. She asked only for her coat and the book she was reading. During the flight back to Mill Creek, she said nothing. She refused food, refused sleep, and stared out the window like someone watching a film she had already seen. Her return sent shockwaves through the town. People lined the courthouse steps just to catch a glimpse of her. Reporters shouted questions she never answered. Her parents, looking tired and aged beyond their years, did not attend her initial arraignment. Caleb, the surviving cousin, remained in hiding, far from the public eye. He had changed his name and disappeared shortly after her vanishing, unwilling to be part of the media circus. But when he learned of her capture, he made a single statement through his lawyer. "Some nightmares, Dundee, end when you wake up." The trial began 3 months later. It was the most high-profile case Mill Creek had ever seen. The courtroom was packed every day with journalists, legal experts, and curious locals. The prosecution laid out the evidence with devastating clarity. The journals, the staged crime scene, the escape plan. They painted Delilah as a cold, calculating manipulator who saw the people around her as pawns. The defense attempted to argue that Delilah had suffered a psychotic break, citing emotional pressure and a history of family dysfunction. But their case crumbled under the weight of her own words. Her writings were damning, each page a confession. Perhaps the most disturbing moment of the trial came when the prosecution read a final entry from her notebook. It had been written the night before Marcus was killed. It read, "Tomorrow they'll both be mine in different ways. One will bleed, one will break, and I will vanish into legend." Delilah showed no emotion as the entry was read. No tears, no anger, no remorse. To the jury, her silence was louder than any outburst. In the end, the verdict came swiftly. Guilty of second-degree murder, attempted murder, and premeditated conspiracy to commit fraud and escape justice. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As she was led away, she turned to face the courtroom. A small smile played at the corners of her lips. She nodded once as if to say, "I told you I could do it." After the trial, the Whitmore estate was sold off. The vineyards closed. Margaret and Charles moved out of town, their once proud family name now a curse whispered behind closed doors. Caleb was never seen publicly again. Marcus was buried on a quiet hillside with only a few close friends and family in attendance. His grave became a quiet place for those still haunted by what had happened. Delilah Whitmore became a symbol, not just of evil, but of deception so complete, it nearly succeeded. True crime enthusiasts wrote books. Documentaries aired. Psychologists studied her behavior in classrooms. Her story became a cautionary tale of how charm, beauty, and intelligence, when twisted by narcissism and hunger for control, could be used as tools of destruction. Inside prison, Delilah remained unbothered. She declined interviews, avoided therapy sessions, and maintained perfect behavior. She earned the nickname the Ice Queen from the guards. Some said she was waiting, for what no one could say. But others believed she wasn't waiting at all. She had already won in her own mind. She hadn't just wanted to escape her life, she had wanted to remake it. And for a time, she had. Even behind bars, Delilah Whitmore remained exactly what she had always been, the author of her own legend, and the architect of a crime that would never be forgotten.